Listen, on 17 September, my finance minister crashes through my bedroom door without protocol, just raw panic. Mr. President, IMF just issued seizure order, our gold reserves. $3.2 billion. They're claiming loan default. Swiss banks have frozen our accounts. They're moving to confiscate everything. My heart stops. This is the moment I prepared I knew would come, the moment they try to take everything. I throw off the covers. One command, activate protocol sovereign. Few months earlier, IMF headquarters, Washington, D.C., pristine conference room, mahogany table, crystal water glasses, senior IMF officials explaining their restructuring proposal for Burkina Faso's debt. They call it assistance. I call it theft with paperwork. Mr. President, Burkina Faso's debt situation requires immediate intervention. We're proposing a $2.1 billion bailout package with standard structural adjustment requirements. I read the document. 73 pages. Dense financial language. Designed to confuse. Designed to hide what they're really demanding. But I'm not the president who signs without reading. I'm not the leader who trusts IMF's humanitarian rhetoric. I spent 3 days analyzing every clause. Page 12. Article 7. Borrower agrees to privatize state-owned mining operations within 18 months of loan disbursement. Translation. Sell our gold mines to Western corporations at discounted prices. Page 23. Article 15. Borrower agrees to eliminate agricultural subsidies and open markets to international competition. Translation. Destroy our farmers so Western agribusiness can dominate our food supply. Page 31. Article 19. Borrower pledges all gold reserves as collateral against loan default, with IMF authorized to seize assets through international banking channels. Translation. If we can't pay, they take our gold, all of it, $3.2 billion worth. The wealth we've accumulated, the reserves backing our currency, the foundation of our economic sovereignty. I close the document. Look at the IMF officials. 3 men, 2 women, all Western, all confident, all expecting my signature because African leaders always sign. No. The lead negotiator blinks, confused. I'm sorry, Mr. President. No, I'm not signing. I'm not privatizing our mines. I'm not eliminating agricultural subsidies. I'm not pledging our gold reserves as collateral. No. Mr. President, without this bailout, Burkina Faso faces severe economic challenges, currency devaluation, inflation, potential default on existing obligations. We'll manage our challenges ourselves without IMF control over our economy. This is a mistake. The international financial community will view rejection negatively. Credit ratings will suffer. Investment will decline. You're isolating Burkina Faso economically. I stand. Meeting over. We're not isolating ourselves. We're protecting ourselves. From predatory lending disguised as assistance. From structural adjustment that destroys sovereignty. From you. I leave. They sit stunned. African president just refused IMF bailout, rejected their conditions, walked away from $2.1 billion. They can't comprehend it. But I'm not done. Refusing isn't enough. I need to protect our gold, because I know what's coming. I know IMF doesn't accept rejection. I know they'll try to take our reserves anyway. I fly to Beijing, unannounced visit, no media coverage, no diplomatic fanfare. Just me, my finance minister, and a proposal that will change everything. Meeting with Chinese central bank officials. Secure room. No recording devices, complete confidentiality. We want to move our gold reserves, all of it. $3.2 billion, 847 metric tons, from Swiss banks to Chinese custody. Immediately, secretly, completely. The Chinese officials exchange glances, understanding the implications, understanding why I'm asking, understanding what this means. Mr. President, this would be unprecedented. Moving that much gold without international banking system knowledge, the logistics alone. Can you do it? Silence, calculations, risk assessments, geopolitical considerations. Yes, but it requires absolute secrecy. If IMF discovers the transfer before completion, they'll freeze everything. If Western intelligence detects movement, they'll intervene. If Swiss banks suspect, they'll block access. How long? 3 months. We'll need to coordinate military transport, secure routes, false manifests, decoy shipments, complete operational security. Do it, whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Our gold leaves Switzerland before IMF can touch it. The most dangerous 3 months of my presidency. Our entire gold reserve in transit. Vulnerable. Exposed. One leak means losing everything. Chinese military transport aircraft, flying at night, avoiding Western radar coverage, using routes through Russian airspace, landing at remote airfields, transferring gold under armed guard. Swiss banks think our gold is still in their vaults. We've maintained the accounts, continued paying storage fees, created perfect illusion that nothing changed. IMF thinks our reserves are pledged to existing loans. They've calculated our collateral, planned their seizure, prepared their legal justification. Western intelligence agencies monitor our financial transactions, but they see normal patterns, regular activity, no indication of massive gold transfer. Because the Chinese operation is perfect, completely covert, totally secure, absolutely secret. Final shipment arrives in Beijing. 847 metric tons. $3.2 billion. Every ounce of Burkina Faso's gold reserves, now stored in Chinese central bank vaults. Beyond IMF reach. Beyond Western control, beyond their ability to seize. I receive confirmation via encrypted message. One word. Complete. I exhale for the first time in 3 months. Our gold is safe. Our sovereignty is protected. Our economic independence is secured. But I don't announce it. Don't reveal the transfer. Don't let IMF know what I've done. Because I'm waiting. Waiting for them to try. Waiting to spring the trap. IMF issues statement. Burkina Faso has defaulted on loan obligations. Under terms of existing agreements, IMF is authorized to seize pledged collateral. We are initiating legal proceedings to confiscate gold reserves held in Swiss banking system. They think they're taking our gold. They think we're helpless. They think African nation can't outmaneuver IMF. They're about to learn how wrong they are. August 15th, 4:47 a.m. My finance ministers panic. IMF seizure order. Swiss account freezes. The moment I've been preparing for. Activate protocol sovereign. My finance minister's face changes. Panic transforms to understanding. He knows what protocol sovereign means. He knows what I'm about to reveal. 6 a.m. I call emergency press conference. International media, African networks, global coverage. The IMF officials who tried to seize our gold watching from Washington. I walk to the podium. Behind me, large screens, financial documents, transfer receipts, vault photographs, evidence of what I'm about to announce. Yesterday, the International Monetary Fund issued an order to seize Burkina Faso's gold reserves. $3.2 billion worth. They claim loan default. They claim legal authority. They claim our gold is collateral. I pause. Let the cameras focus. Let the moment build. There's one problem with their seizure order. The gold isn't there. Confusion ripples through the press corps. IMF officials in Washington scrambling. Swiss bankers checking vaults. Everyone trying to understand what I just said. 3 months ago, we transferred our entire gold reserve. 847 metric tons, every ounce. From Swiss banks to secure storage in China, beyond IMF jurisdiction, beyond Western control, beyond their ability to confiscate. I display the transfer documentation on screens, Chinese central bank receipts, military transport logs, vault storage confirmations, complete proof. IMF thought they could seize our gold, thought African nation wouldn't see it coming, thought we'd be helpless when they moved. They were wrong. The room explodes. Questions shouted. Cameras flashing. Reporters demanding confirmation. Diplomats rushing to contact their governments. Story detonating across every platform simultaneously. IMF issues emergency statement within 30 minutes. We are investigating reports of unauthorized gold transfer. If confirmed, this represents serious breach of international financial protocols. Burkina Faso may face severe consequences. I respond immediately. Another press conference. 2 hours after the first. Because I'm not done exposing them. IMF threatens consequences. Let me explain what actually happened. Let me show you the documents they don't want you to see. Let me expose the trap they set for Burkina Faso. I display the loan agreement they wanted me to sign. Article 19. Gold reserves as collateral. Seizure authorization. They offered $2.1 billion loan with conditions that would destroy our economy, privatize our mines, eliminate agricultural subsidies, surrender economic sovereignty, and pledge our gold as collateral. Not just any loan, not simple financial assistance, not straightforward development funding. This was TRAP, carefully designed, meticulously structured, deliberately crafted to give IMF control over Burkina Faso's economic future while appearing to help us. $2.1 billion sounds generous, sounds like substantial assistance, sounds like IMF genuinely trying to help struggling African nation, until you read the conditions, until you understand what they're demanding in exchange, until you realize the loan is mechanism for transferring control. Privatize our mines, Article 7 of their proposal. Borrower agrees to privatize state-owned mining operations within 18 months of loan disbursement. Burkina Faso has significant gold deposits, substantial manganese reserves, valuable mineral resources, state-owned mining operations that generate revenue for our government, revenue that funds schools, hospitals, infrastructure, revenue that belongs to Burkinabe people. IMF wanted us to sell those mines to private companies, to foreign corporations. At market prices they would help determine, prices that would inevitably favor Western mining companies, prices that would transfer our national wealth to foreign ownership. They called it improving efficiency, called it attracting investment, called it modernizing our mining sector. I call it theft, forcing us to sell national assets to foreign corporations in exchange for loan we wouldn't need if they weren't systematically extracting our wealth through other mechanisms. Eliminate agricultural subsidies. Article 15. Borrower agrees to eliminate agricultural subsidies and open markets to international competition. Burkinabe farmers are backbone of our economy. Grow cotton, millet, sorghum, maize, feed our nation, generate export revenue, sustain rural communities. They survive partly because government provides subsidies, seeds, fertilizer, equipment, support that makes farming viable. IMF wanted us to eliminate those subsidies, expose our farmers to international competition, competition from American farmers receiving billions in U.S. government subsidies, competition from European farmers protected by EU agricultural policies, competition that would destroy our farmers while calling it free market. They called it reducing market distortions, called it improving competitiveness, called it integrating into global economy. I call it destroying our food security, forcing our farmers out of business so Western agribusiness can dominate our markets. Surrender economic sovereignty. That's what all their conditions added up to. Not individual policies, not separate requirements. Coordinated surrender of our ability to make our own economic decisions. Privatize mines means losing control over our natural resources. Eliminate subsidies means losing ability to protect our farmers. Open markets means losing capacity to develop our industries. Accept IMF monitoring means losing sovereignty over our economic policy. Every condition designed to transfer decision-making power from Burkina Faso government to IMF bureaucrats, from elected African leaders to unelected Western economists, from sovereign nation to subordinate client state, and pledge our gold as collateral, Article 19, the clause that revealed their real objective, the provision that exposed the trap, the requirement that made me understand what they were actually planning. Borrower pledges all gold reserves as collateral against loan default, with IMF authorized to seize assets through international banking channels. $3.2 billion in gold reserves, 847 metric tons, accumulated over decades, stored in Swiss banks, backing our currency, providing economic stability, representing our national wealth. IMF wanted us to pledge all of it, as collateral, against loan default, with authorization for them to seize it, through international banking channels, through Swiss banks that would cooperate with IMF, through financial system designed to facilitate exactly this kind of confiscation. The math was obvious. They offer $2.1 billion loan. We pledge $3.2 billion collateral. We default, which their conditions would ensure by destroying our economy. They seize $3.2 billion. Net result, IMF profits $1.1 billion from loan designed to make us fail. I refused. But I knew refusal wouldn't stop them. I knew they'd find another justification to seize our gold. So I moved it. Secretly. Completely. Before they could act. Refusal was easy part. Reading their proposal, understanding the trap, recognizing the exploitation, walking away from $2.1 billion rather than surrender sovereignty. That was straightforward decision. But I knew IMF doesn't accept refusal gracefully, doesn't respect sovereign decisions that contradict their objectives, doesn't abandon plans just because African president says no. They would find another way, another justification, another mechanism to seize what they wanted. So I planned, secretly, carefully, completely, moved our gold before they could act, transferred reserves before they could freeze accounts, protected our wealth before they could confiscate it. 3 months of covert operation, Chinese military aircraft, night flights, remote airfields, armed convoys, 847 metric tons moved from Switzerland to China, $3.2 billion transferred beyond IMF reach, complete operational security maintained until every ounce was safe. I knew they'd find another justification, because I understood how IMF operates, how they target African nations, how they create crises to justify interventions, how they manufacture defaults to enable seizures. They would claim we defaulted on existing loans, would manipulate debt calculations, would impose impossible repayment schedules, would create technical violations of agreements we'd signed years ago, would find some justification, any justification to seize our gold. So I moved it first, before they could act, before they could freeze accounts, before they could coordinate with Swiss banks, before they could execute their plan. I display more documents, IMF internal communications, leaked by sympathetic sources, planning documents for Burkina Faso gold seizure, dated before any default occurred, proving they planned to take our gold regardless. Not speculation, not theory, not paranoid assumption, documented fact, IMF internal documents, leaked by sources inside their organization, people who understood what was being planned, people who disagreed with the exploitation, people who wanted African nations to know the truth. Planning documents dated February 2024, before I refused their loan, before any default occurred, before any justification existed, already planning gold seizure, already coordinating with Swiss banks, already preparing legal justification, already targeting Burkina Faso's reserves. The documents are detailed, specific, undeniable. Target: Burkina Faso gold reserves, 847 metric tons, estimated value $3.2 billion, stored in Swiss Banking Corporation vaults, Geneva. Timeline: seizure authorization June 2024. Legal justification: loan default under existing agreements, coordinating institutions, Swiss Banking Corporation, World Bank, U.S. Treasury. Proof they planned this before any default. Proof the loan offer was trap. Proof the seizure was always the objective. Proof that refusing the loan wouldn't protect us. Proof that moving the gold was necessary. They were always going to seize our gold. The loan default was excuse. The legal proceedings were cover. The real objective was confiscating African wealth. Again. Like they've been doing for decades. Always going to seize it. Not might seize, not could seize if we defaulted. Always going to seize. The planning documents prove it. The timeline proves it. The coordination with Swiss banks proves it. They were always going to take our gold. The only question was which excuse they'd use. Loan default was excuse, convenient justification, legal cover for theft. They would offer loan with impossible conditions. We'd refuse or default. They'd claim legal right to seize collateral. Courts would support them. Swiss banks would cooperate. Gold would disappear into IMF accounts. African wealth confiscated with legal paperwork. Legal proceedings were cover, making theft look legitimate, making confiscation appear justified, making seizure seem like enforcement of contracts rather than organized robbery. Legal proceedings designed to obscure the fundamental reality, powerful institutions stealing from weaker nations. Real objective was confiscating African wealth, not helping African development, not providing financial assistance, not supporting economic growth, confiscating wealth, taking gold, transferring African resources to Western control, again, like they've been doing since colonialism officially ended but actually continued through financial mechanisms. For decades, not isolated incident, not unique situation, not exceptional case, decades of systematic wealth extraction, decades of using financial institutions to confiscate African resources, decades of loans designed to fail and collateral designed to be seized. African journalists stand, applauding, understanding exactly what this represents. Western correspondents typing frantically. Understanding this is massive scandal. African journalists understand immediately. They've reported on debt crises. They've covered structural adjustment programs. They've documented how IMF loans destroy economies. They've seen the pattern. Now they're seeing the proof. The documents that confirm what they've suspected. The evidence that validates their reporting. The smoking gun that proves systematic exploitation. The evidence that validates their reporting. The smoking gun that proves systematic exploitation. They stand because this is vindication, this is confirmation, this is the story they've been trying to tell for years, finally proven with IMF's own documents. They applaud because African president just exposed what they've been investigating. They understand this changes everything. Western correspondents type frantically. This is scandal, major scandal, international scandal. IMF caught planning to seize African nations' gold reserves, documents proving premeditated confiscation, evidence of coordinated theft involving multiple Western institutions, story that will dominate news cycles, story that will trigger investigations, story that will shake international financial system. They're typing because this is huge, because their editors are demanding copy, because this story is breaking globally, because IMF is about to face crisis, because African nations are about to revolt, because the financial system is about to destabilize. But here's what they didn't expect. African president who saw through their scheme, African nation that moved faster than they did, African gold now protected beyond their reach. They didn't expect me to investigate, to read documents carefully, to understand financial mechanisms, to recognize the trap. They expected typical African leader, sign without reading, accept without questioning, trust without verifying, comply without resisting. They didn't expect me to refuse, to walk away from $2.1 billion, to choose sovereignty over money, to prioritize long-term independence over short-term assistance. They expected financial pressure would force acceptance, expected economic challenges would compel compliance, expected we'd have no choice. They didn't expect me to move the gold, to coordinate with China, to execute covert operation, to transfer 847 metric tons without their knowledge, to complete operation before they could act. They expected our gold would stay in Swiss banks where they could seize it. Expected we'd be helpless when they moved. Expected African nation couldn't outmaneuver IMF. African president who saw through their scheme, who read the documents, who understood the trap, who recognized the pattern, who refused to become another victim of financial colonialism, who protected national wealth instead of surrendering it. African nation that moved faster, that planned covertly, that executed efficiently, that coordinated internationally, that completed operation before IMF could react. That proved African nations can move decisively when sovereignty is threatened. African gold now protected beyond their reach, in Beijing, in Chinese central bank vaults, under Chinese sovereignty, beyond IMF jurisdiction, beyond Swiss bank cooperation, beyond Western financial system control, protected, safe, ours. The reaction is unprecedented, explosive, continental, unprecedented because nothing like this has happened before. African nation preemptively moving gold reserves to avoid IMF seizure. African president exposing IMF planning documents. African leader triggering continental financial revolt. No precedent, no previous example, no historical parallel. Explosive because implications are enormous. If Burkina Faso can protect its gold, other nations can too. If IMF planned to seize our reserves, they're planning to seize others' reserves. If moving gold to non-Western custody works, everyone should do it. Explosive realization spreading across continent. Continental because reaction isn't limited to Burkina Faso, isn't isolated to West Africa, isn't confined to Francophone nations. Continental. Every African nation with gold reserves suddenly questioning their safety. Every African leader suddenly examining their loan agreements. Every African finance minister suddenly reviewing their collateral pledges. Within 6 hours, 5 African nations announced they're reviewing their gold storage arrangements. Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, all questioning whether their reserves are safe in Western banks. 6 hours. That's how fast the reaction spreads. That's how quickly African leaders understand the implications. That's how rapidly the awakening happens. 6 hours from my announcement to 5 nations publicly questioning their gold storage. Kenya announces review of gold reserves stored in London. Finance Minister issues statement. In light of recent revelations about IMF planning, Kenya is conducting comprehensive review of our gold storage arrangements to ensure our national wealth is adequately protected against unauthorized seizure attempts. Translation: we're checking if our gold is safe. We're examining our vulnerability. We're considering moving our reserves like Burkina Faso did. Tanzania reviews reserves stored in Swiss banks. President's office releases statement. Tanzania takes seriously any indication that international financial institutions may target African gold reserves. We are reviewing our storage arrangements and exploring alternatives that provide greater security and sovereignty. Translation: we don't trust Swiss banks anymore. We're looking at Chinese, Russian, Indian options. We're preparing to move our gold. Ghana examines reserves split between London and New York. Finance Ministry announces Ghana is conducting urgent assessment of our gold reserve security following evidence that IMF planned seizure operations against African nations. We will take all necessary measures to protect Ghanaian national wealth. Translation: we're vulnerable, we're exposed, we're moving our gold before IMF targets us. South Africa, largest gold producer in Africa, reviews massive reserves stored in multiple Western locations. Treasury Department issues detailed statement. South Africa holds significant gold reserves in various international locations. Recent evidence of planned IMF seizure operations against African nations requires us to comprehensively review our storage arrangements to ensure our reserves remain under South African sovereign control. Translation: we have a lot of gold in Western banks. We're seriously worried. We're probably moving it. Zimbabwe, despite Western sanctions, reviews reserves stored in Asian banks. Reserve Bank announces Zimbabwe's gold reserves are currently stored in secure Asian facilities. However, we are reviewing all arrangements to ensure maximum protection against any potential seizure attempts by Western financial institutions. Translation: we already moved our gold out of Western control because of sanctions, but we're making sure it's really safe. Within 12 hours, 3 nations announced gold transfers to non-Western custody. Mali moving reserves to Russia. Niger transferring to China. Chad negotiating with India. 12 hours, 3 nations. Actual transfers announced, not just reviewing, not just considering. Actually moving, actually transferring, actually protecting. Mali announces immediate transfer of gold reserves to Russia. Presidential decree. Effective immediately, all Malian gold reserves will be transferred from French banking custody to secure storage in Russian Federation. This transfer protects Malian national wealth from potential seizure by Western financial institutions that have demonstrated intention to confiscate African resources. Direct, blunt, no diplomatic softening. Protecting from seizure by Western institutions. Acknowledging the threat. Acting decisively. Niger announces transfer to China. Government statement. Niger is transferring all gold reserves from Western banking system to secure storage in People's Republic of China. This action protects Niger's economic sovereignty and ensures our national wealth remains under Niger's control. Following Burkina Faso's model, using same language, citing same justification, coordinated response to coordinated threat. Chad announces negotiations with India. Finance Ministry. Chad is in advanced negotiations with Indian government to transfer our gold reserves to secure storage in India. We are committed to protecting Chadian national wealth from any potential seizure attempts by international financial institutions. Exploring third option. Diversifying beyond China and Russia. Creating multiple non-Western alternatives. Building resilient system. Within 24 hours, IMF faces crisis, African nations withdrawing trust, gold reserves fleeing Western control, financial system they've dominated for decades suddenly unstable. 24 hours from my announcement to full-blown crisis. That's how fast confidence collapses. That's how rapidly trust evaporates. That's how quickly financial system destabilizes when foundation of exploitation gets exposed. African nations withdrawing trust, not just Burkina Faso, not just Mali, Niger, Chad, continent-wide trust withdrawal. Every African nation with gold reserves questioning whether Western banks are safe. Every African leader wondering if IMF is planning to seize their wealth. Every African finance minister reviewing their vulnerability. Trust is foundation of financial system. Banks hold assets because depositors trust them. IMF has power because nations trust their intentions. Western financial institutions dominate because countries trust their security. That trust is evaporating. Rapidly, completely, irreversibly. Gold reserves fleeing Western control, not slowly, not gradually, not over years, rapidly, within hours of my announcement, within days of exposure, massive capital flight. $47 billion in first month, $89 billion in 3 months. Unprecedented wealth transfer from Western to non-Western custody. Financial system they've dominated for decades suddenly unstable. System built on controlling African wealth. System dependent on African nations keeping reserves in Western banks. System assuming African leaders would never challenge Western financial dominance. That system is collapsing, destabilizing, failing. IMF director calls me. Private line. Urgent. Desperate. Private line. Not official communication, not diplomatic channel, not formal contact. Private, because he doesn't want this conversation recorded, doesn't want it reported. Doesn't want it known that IMF director is calling African president to beg him to stop continental financial revolt. Urgent. Can't wait. Can't go through normal channels. Can't delay. Crisis is happening now. Nations are moving gold now. System is destabilizing now. He needs to stop it now. Desperate. I hear it in his voice. Hear the panic. Hear the realization that they've lost control. Hear the understanding that IMF's power is crumbling. Desperate attempt to salvage situation. Desperate plea to stop the exodus. Desperate offer to negotiate. President Traoré, your actions are destabilizing the international financial system. Other nations are following your example. This could trigger crisis. Blame me. Not IMF's planning to seize gold. Not decades of financial exploitation. Not systematic theft of African wealth. My actions. My announcement. My exposure of their scheme. Blame the victim who fought back. Blame the African president who protected his nation. Blame the leader who refused to be robbed. Destabilizing the international financial system. The system that extracts African wealth. The system that maintains African poverty. The system that ensures Western dominance. That system. The one designed to exploit us. Yes, I'm destabilizing it. Deliberately, intentionally, successfully. Other nations are following your example. 5 nations reviewing storage. 3 nations transferring reserves. More nations preparing to move. Continental revolt against financial colonialism. Yes, they're following my example. Example of protecting national wealth. Example of refusing exploitation. Example of sovereignty enforcement. This could trigger crisis. Could? Already has triggered crisis. $47 billion fleeing Western banks. African nations withdrawing trust. Financial system destabilizing. Crisis isn't potential. Crisis is actual. Crisis is happening. Crisis is his problem now. Good. Your system deserves to be destabilized. It's built on exploiting African wealth, on seizing our resources, on keeping us dependent. Let it collapse. Good. Not sorry. Not concerned. Not worried about crisis. Good. Because crisis is justice. Crisis is consequence. Crisis is accountability. System built on exploitation deserves to collapse. System designed to steal deserves to fail. System maintaining African poverty deserves to destabilize. Your system, not our system, not international system, not global financial architecture. Your system, Western system, IMF system, system that serves Western interests, system that extracts African wealth, system that maintains neo-colonial control. Your system, you built it, you operate it, you benefit from it, you deal with its collapse. Built on exploiting African wealth, loans designed to fail, conditions designed to destroy economies, collateral designed to be seized, decades of systematic exploitation, decades of wealth extraction, decades of keeping Africa poor while claiming to help, built on exploitation, deserves to collapse. On seizing our resources, not just planning to seize, actually seizing, for decades, through various mechanisms, debt traps, structural adjustment, privatization, collateral confiscation, seizing resources, seizing wealth, seizing sovereignty. That's what your system does. That's why it deserves to fail. On keeping us dependent, that's the objective. Not helping African development, not supporting African growth, not enabling African prosperity, keeping us dependent, keeping us subordinate, keeping us exploitable. That's what your system is designed to do. That's why I'm destabilizing it. Let it collapse. Not trying to save it. Not trying to reform it. Not trying to make it work better. Let it collapse. Completely. Permanently. Irreversibly. Build something different. Something that doesn't exploit Africa. Something that respects sovereignty. Something that serves African interests. We can negotiate, restructure your loans, better terms, more flexibility. Just stop encouraging other nations to move their gold. Now he wants to negotiate. Now he offers better terms. Now he promises flexibility. After I exposed their scheme, after I moved our gold, after I triggered continental revolt, now he wants to negotiate. Too late, trust is gone, credibility is destroyed, power is broken. Restructure your loans, better terms, more flexibility, offers he should have made before planning to seize our gold, offers that might have mattered before I saw the documents, offers that are meaningless now that I know their real intentions. Too little, too late, too obviously desperate. Just stop encouraging other nations to move their gold. That's what he really wants. Not to help Burkina Faso, not to provide better terms, not to negotiate fairly. Just stop the exodus. Just stop other nations from protecting their wealth. Just stop the crisis that's destroying IMF's power. I'm not encouraging anyone. I'm just protecting Burkina Faso's sovereignty. If other nations see that example and follow it, that's their choice. That's their sovereignty. Not encouraging, not coordinating, not organizing continental revolt, just protecting Burkina Faso, just moving our gold, just exposing their documents, just exercising sovereignty. If other nations follow, that's their decision, that's their sovereignty, that's their right. Just protecting Burkina Faso's sovereignty, that's my responsibility, that's my duty, that's my obligation as president. Protect our nation, protect our wealth, protect our sovereignty, not coordinating with other nations, not encouraging continental revolt, just protecting Burkina Faso. If other nations see that example and follow it, see that moving gold is possible, see that IMF can be outmaneuvered, see that Western financial system can be defied, see that African wealth can be protected. If they see that example and decide to follow it, that's their choice. That's their choice, their decision, their sovereignty, not my responsibility, not my encouragement, not my coordination. Their sovereign choice to protect their own wealth, their sovereign decision to move their own gold, their sovereign right to defy IMF just like I did. That's their sovereignty, the fundamental principle, the core issue, the real point. Sovereignty means making your own decisions, controlling your own wealth, protecting your own interests. If African nations are exercising sovereignty by moving gold, that's not crisis, that's sovereignty, that's freedom, that's independence. The consequences. He starts to threaten, starts to warn about consequences, starts to suggest retaliation, then stops, because he realizes threats are empty, because he understands I don't care about consequences, because he knows threatening me just proves everything I've said about IMF. Will be yours to face. You tried to steal our gold. You failed. Now deal with the fallout. Will be yours to face. Not mine, not Burkina Faso's, not African nations. Yours, IMF's, Western financial systems. You created this crisis by planning to seize African gold. You triggered this revolt by trying to steal our wealth. You destabilized your own system by exposing your exploitation. Consequences are yours. You tried to steal our gold. Not borrow, not hold as collateral. Steal. The planning documents prove it. The timeline proves it. The coordination proves it. You tried to steal $3.2 billion from Burkina Faso, tried to confiscate our national wealth, tried to rob us using legal mechanisms. You failed. I moved the gold first. I transferred it to China. I protected it beyond your reach. You failed. Your plan failed. Your scheme failed. Your attempt to steal African wealth failed. And that failure is destroying your power. Now deal with the fallout. African nations withdrawing trust, gold reserves fleeing your system, financial architecture crumbling, continental revolt against your institutions. That's fallout. That's consequence. That's what happens when exploitation gets exposed. Deal with it. I hang up. Done negotiating with institution that tried to rob us. Hang up. End call. Terminate conversation. No more negotiation, no more discussion, no more engagement with IMF. Done. Finished. Permanently. Done negotiating. Because negotiation implies good faith, implies mutual respect, implies honest dealing. IMF has none of that. IMF planned to steal our gold. IMF tried to rob us. IMF attempted to confiscate our wealth. Can't negotiate with thieves. Can't deal honestly with institutions planning theft. Done negotiating. With institution that tried to rob us. That's what IMF is now. Not development institution, not financial assistance organization, not international cooperation body. Institution that tried to rob us. Thieves with legal paperwork, criminals with diplomatic immunity, robbers with institutional legitimacy. That's IMF, and I'm done with them. 3 days after the announcement, Chinese Foreign Ministry issues statement supporting Burkina Faso's decision. 3 days. Calculated timing. Not immediate. Not rushed. Not reactive. 3 days. Enough time to assess situation. Enough time to coordinate response. Enough time to craft statement. Deliberate support. Considered backing. Strategic endorsement. Chinese Foreign Ministry. Official. Governmental. Authoritative. Not unofficial sources. Not anonymous support. Not private encouragement. Official statement from Chinese government. Public backing. Diplomatic support. Strategic alignment. China respects Burkina Faso's sovereign right to manage its gold reserves. We provide secure storage as service to friendly nation. We will protect these reserves against any unauthorized seizure attempts. Respects sovereign right. Acknowledges sovereignty. Supports independence. Recognizes authority. China publicly stating that Burkina Faso has right to move gold. Right to protect wealth. Right to choose storage location. Sovereign right that China respects. We provide secure storage as service. Not control, not ownership, not leverage. Service, storage service, secure storage. For friendly nation, not subordinate, not client. Not dependent. Friendly nation, equal relationship, mutual respect. Service provision, not control mechanism. We will protect these reserves against any unauthorized seizure attempts. Commitment, guarantee, promise. China will protect Burkina Faso's gold, will prevent seizure, will defend against IMF. Will use Chinese sovereignty to shield African wealth. That's commitment, that's backing, that's strategic support. Russian Foreign Ministry follows. Russia supports African nations protecting their wealth from Western financial manipulation. We offer similar storage services to any African nation seeking to secure their reserves. Russia follows Chinese lead. Coordinated response. Strategic alignment. Both major powers supporting African nations. Both offering alternatives to Western financial system. Both committing to protect African wealth. Both challenging Western dominance. Supports African nations. Not just Burkina Faso. Not just Mali. African nations. Plural. Continental. Russia supporting any African nation that wants to protect wealth. Supporting continental revolt. Supporting systematic challenge to Western financial control. Protecting their wealth from Western financial manipulation. Direct language. Blunt accusation. No diplomatic softening. Western financial manipulation. Russia publicly stating that Western financial system manipulates African nations. Publicly supporting African resistance. Publicly offering alternative. We offer similar storage services, like China. Russia offering to store African gold, offering secure custody, offering protection from seizure, offering alternative to Western banks, creating non-Western financial infrastructure for African wealth. To any African nation seeking to secure their reserves, open offer, universal availability, any African nation, not selective, not conditional. Any nation that wants to move gold from Western control to Russian custody, open offer, strategic opportunity, alternative system. India announces new gold storage facility specifically for African nations. Secure, sovereign, beyond Western financial system control. India joins. Third major power, third alternative, third option for African nations. Not just China, not just Russia. India too. Multiple alternatives, diversified options. Resilient system. New gold storage facility specifically for African nations. Purpose-built, designed for African reserves, dedicated to African wealth protection, not general storage, not multi-purpose facility. Specifically for African nations, showing commitment, demonstrating seriousness, proving support. secure, sovereign, beyond Western financial system control. 3 key features, 3 selling points, 3 guarantees, secure, protected from theft, sovereign under Indian control, not Western. Beyond Western financial system, immune to IMF seizure attempts. The alternative system is emerging. African gold leaving Western banks, moving to Chinese, Russian, Indian custody, beyond IMF reach, beyond Western control, beyond their ability to seize. Alternative system, not reforming existing system, not improving Western institutions, not making IMF better, alternative, different, separate. Non-Western financial architecture for African wealth, emerging, building, solidifying. African gold leaving Western banks, not staying, not remaining, leaving, exodus, mass transfer, systematic movement, from Swiss banks to Chinese vaults, from London storage to Russian facilities, from New York custody to Indian security, leaving Western control, moving to Chinese, Russian, Indian custody, to alternatives, to non-Western options, to powers that support African sovereignty, to institutions that won't seize African wealth, to systems that respect African independence, moving, transferring, protecting, beyond IMF reach. That's the objective, that's the goal, that's the achievement. Gold stored in China is beyond IMF jurisdiction. Gold in Russia is beyond Western legal system. Gold in India is beyond Swiss bank cooperation, beyond reach, beyond control, beyond seizure capability, beyond Western control, not just IMF, entire Western financial system. Swiss banks can't freeze accounts, American courts can't order seizures, European institutions can't confiscate reserves. Beyond Western control, protected by non-Western sovereignty, secured by alternative system, beyond their ability to seize. That's what matters. That's what protects African wealth. That's what ensures sovereignty. They can't seize what they can't reach. Can't confiscate what they don't control. Can't steal what's protected by Chinese, Russian, Indian sovereignty. Beyond their ability. Protected. Safe. Ours. IMF's power is crumbling. Their threat of gold seizure meaningless if the gold isn't in their system. Their leverage over African nations evaporating as reserves move beyond their jurisdiction. Power is crumbling. Not might crumble, not could crumble. Is crumbling. Present tense. Happening now. IMF's power over African nations is collapsing. Authority is evaporating. Control is disappearing. Leverage is vanishing. Power crumbling in real time. Threat of gold seizure meaningless. That was their ultimate leverage, their final threat, their most powerful tool. Comply or we seize your gold. Accept our conditions or we confiscate your reserves. Surrender sovereignty or we take your wealth. That threat is meaningless now, because gold isn't where they can seize it, because reserves are beyond their reach, because African nations moved wealth to safety. If the gold isn't in their system, that's the key, that's the transformation, that's the revolution. Gold in Western banks is vulnerable. Gold in Swiss vaults can be frozen. Gold in their system can be seized, but gold in China is safe. Gold in Russia is protected. Gold in India is secure. If gold isn't in their system, their threats are empty. Leverage over African nations evaporating. Leverage requires vulnerability, requires something to threaten, requires ability to harm. IMF's leverage was gold seizure, was debt manipulation, was financial control. That leverage is evaporating as African nations move gold, reject loans, build alternatives, evaporating, disappearing, gone. As reserves move beyond their jurisdiction, every ton of gold transferred is leverage lost. Every nation that moves reserves is control diminished. Every $1 billion leaving Western banks is power reduced. Reserves moving beyond jurisdiction, beyond control, beyond leverage. IMF's power crumbling as African wealth escapes. 1 week after the announcement, African Union emergency session, I'm invited to present. 1 week, 7 days. Continental response organized. African Union convened. Emergency session called. I'm invited to present. To explain. To share evidence. To inspire action. To coordinate response. 1 week from announcement to continental coordination. African Union emergency session. All 54 member states, heads of state, finance ministers, central bank governors, diplomatic representatives, continental gathering. Unprecedented attendance. extraordinary attention, everyone understanding the significance, everyone recognizing the moment, everyone ready to act. I'm invited to present, not demanded, not summoned, invited. African Union respecting sovereignty, requesting participation, asking for leadership. Invited because what I did matters, because what I exposed is important, because what I'm proposing is revolutionary. Brothers and sisters, what happened to Burkina Faso will happen to all of us if we don't act. IMF tried to seize our gold. They'll try to seize yours. They'll find excuses, loan defaults, debt restructuring, financial emergencies. But the real objective is always the same: taking African wealth. Brothers and sisters, not colleagues, not fellow leaders, not diplomatic partners, brothers and sisters, family, kin, united by continent, united by history, united by shared exploitation, united by common threat, brothers and sisters facing same danger, needing same protection, requiring same action. What happened to Burkina Faso will happen to all of us. Not might happen, not could happen, will happen. Certainty, inevitability, guarantee. IMF planned to seize our gold. They're planning to seize yours. They're targeting African wealth systematically. What happened to us is preview, warning, proof of what's coming for everyone. If we don't act, action is necessary. Action is urgent. Action is required. Inaction means seizure. Inaction means theft. Inaction means losing our wealth. We must act, must protect, must move, must secure, must coordinate. If we don't act, we lose everything. IMF tried to seize our gold. Past tense. Already happened. Already attempted. Already planned. Not theoretical. Not hypothetical. Not potential. Actual attempt. Documented plan. Proven conspiracy. They tried. I stopped them. But they'll try again. They'll try others. They'll keep trying until we stop them permanently. They'll try to seize yours. Future tense. Coming threat. Imminent danger, certain attempt, your gold, your reserves, your wealth. They're planning it now, coordinating it now, preparing it now. They'll try. Question isn't if, question is when, question is whether you'll be ready. They'll find excuses, loan defaults, debt restructuring, financial emergencies, creative justifications, legal pretexts, diplomatic cover, but all excuses, all pretexts, all cover for theft. Real objective isn't enforcing contracts. Real objective isn't managing debt. Real objective is taking wealth. But the real objective is always the same: taking African wealth, not helping African development, not supporting African growth, not enabling African prosperity, taking wealth, seizing gold, confiscating reserves, extracting resources. That's always the objective, that's always the goal, that's always the plan: taking African wealth. I display the leaked IMF documents, not just about Burkina Faso, about multiple African nations, target lists, seizure timelines, coordinated operations to confiscate gold reserves across the continent. Not just about Burkina Faso. That's crucial, that's terrifying, that's mobilizing. Documents showing IMF plan to seize our gold, but also planning to seize others' gold. Not isolated incident, not unique case, not exceptional situation, systematic planning, continental targeting, coordinated theft. About multiple African nations: Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mali, Niger, Chad, Ethiopia, Senegal, multiple nations, many targets, widespread planning, all documented, all proven, all exposed. Target lists, actual lists, nation names, gold quantities, storage locations, estimated values, seizure difficulty ratings, priority rankings, target lists like military operations, like intelligence missions, like organized crime, target lists proving systematic planning, seizure timelines, specific dates, coordination schedules, implementation phases, first targets, second wave, third phase, timelines proving this wasn't theoretical, wasn't contingency planning, wasn't emergency preparation. This was operational plan. This was scheduled theft. This was organized confiscation. Coordinated operations, not isolated seizures, not individual actions, not separate incidents. Coordinated, multiple institutions, multiple nations, multiple banks, all working together, all planning together, all preparing to seize African gold together. Coordinated operations proving systematic conspiracy to confiscate gold reserves across the continent. Not one nation, not few nations, across the continent. 54 nations, all targeted, all vulnerable, all scheduled for seizure. Continental theft, systematic confiscation, organized robbery on massive scale. They're planning systematic theft, not just one nation, multiple nations, coordinated seizures, taking our gold while claiming legal authority. Systematic theft, not accidental, not opportunistic, not reactive, systematic, planned, organized, coordinated, methodical, professional. Theft executed with institutional legitimacy. Theft disguised as financial management. Theft protected by legal frameworks. But theft nonetheless. Not just one nation, multiple, many, across continent, widespread targeting, extensive planning, comprehensive conspiracy. They're not just trying to steal from Burkina Faso, they're trying to steal from Africa, from all of us, from every nation with gold reserves. Multiple nations, coordinated seizures, simultaneous operations, synchronized timing, coordinated legal actions, cooperative bank freezes, all happening together, all executed simultaneously, all designed to prevent response. All planned to make resistance impossible. Taking our gold while claiming legal authority. That's the mechanism, that's the method, that's the disguise. Claiming loan defaults, claiming contract violations. Claiming legal right to seize collateral. Claiming courts support them. Claiming banks must cooperate. Claiming legal authority. Making theft look legitimate. Making robbery look lawful. Making confiscation look justified. Ghana's president stands. We have similar loan agreements, similar collateral pledges, similar vulnerability. Ghana's president stands, publicly, in front of 54 nations, admitting vulnerability, acknowledging danger, confirming threat, takes courage, takes honesty, takes recognition that silence is more dangerous than admission, stands, speaks, warns. We have similar loan agreements, same structure, same conditions, same collateral requirements, same vulnerability. What IMF tried with Burkina Faso, they can try with Ghana. What documents proved about our targeting applies to their situation. Similar agreements, similar danger, similar need for action, similar collateral pledges, gold reserves pledged, national wealth at risk, sovereignty surrendered through contracts, similar pledges, similar exposure, similar vulnerability to seizure. Similar vulnerability, that's the point, that's the warning, that's the call to action. If Burkina Faso was vulnerable, Ghana is vulnerable. If IMF targeted us, they're targeting Ghana. If documents proved our danger, Ghana faces same danger. Similar vulnerability requiring similar action. Tanzania. Our gold is in London banks, under British jurisdiction, same risk. Tanzania acknowledges London banks, British jurisdiction, British courts, British legal system, British cooperation with IMF, same risk as Swiss banks, same vulnerability as Burkina Faso, same danger of seizure, same need for protection. Under British jurisdiction, that's the vulnerability, that's the exposure, that's the danger. British courts can order seizure, British banks will cooperate. British legal system will support IMF. Under British jurisdiction means under British control, means vulnerable to seizure, means at risk. Same risk as Burkina Faso, as any nation with gold in Western banks, as every nation with reserves in Western jurisdiction, same risk of seizure, same risk of confiscation, same risk of theft disguised as legal action, same risk requiring same response. Kenya, we've been negotiating IMF loans, now I understand what they're really after. Kenya connects, sees pattern, understands scheme. Negotiating IMF loans, discussing terms, considering conditions. Now, understanding those negotiations weren't about helping Kenya. We're about positioning for gold seizure. We're about creating justification for confiscation. We're about setting trap. Now I understand what they're really after. Not helping Kenya develop, not providing financial assistance, not supporting economic growth, after our gold, after our reserves, after our wealth. That's what they're really after. That's the real objective. That's the hidden agenda. The session votes unanimously. Resolution establishing African Gold Reserve Protection Initiative. Coordinated strategy to move reserves beyond Western control. mutual support for nations facing seizure attempts, collective defense of African wealth, unanimously, all 54 nations, no opposition, no abstentions, no hesitation, unanimous recognition of threat, unanimous commitment to action, unanimous determination to protect African wealth, unanimous vote proving continental unity, resolution establishing African Gold Reserve Protection Initiative, formal, official, institutional, not informal coordination, not voluntary cooperation, not loose alliance, formal initiative, with structure, with resources, with mandate, with authority, established by African Union resolution, backed by continental commitment, coordinated strategy to move reserves beyond Western control, not each nation acting independently, coordinated, planned together, executed together, supported together, strategy to systematically transfer African gold from Western banks to non-Western custody, from vulnerable locations to secure facilities, from IMF reach to protected storage, mutual support for nations facing seizure attempts. If IMF tries to seize Kenyan gold, all 54 nations support Kenya. If Western banks try to freeze Tanzanian accounts, continental response backs Tanzania. If any nation faces seizure attempt, all nations provide support. To jurisdictions that protect African wealth, moving to security, to protection, to safety. Massive capital flight from Western financial system. That's what this is. Capital flight, wealth exodus, financial revolt, massive scale, unprecedented scope, systematic execution. From Western system that exploited Africa to alternative system that respects sovereignty. Within 3 months, 23 nations have moved or are moving reserves. $89 billion in gold. Western banks losing custody. IMF losing leverage. Financial system losing control over African wealth. 3 months, 23 nations, nearly half of African Union, nearly half of continent, 23 nations acting, moving gold, protecting wealth, defying Western financial control. 3 months from resolution to continental transformation. $89 billion, almost doubled from first month, accelerating, expanding, growing. $89 billion in 3 months. Massive wealth transfer, unprecedented capital flight, systematic revolt against Western financial system, Western banks losing custody, Swiss banks losing African deposits, British banks losing African reserves, American banks losing African gold, losing custody, losing deposits, losing revenue, losing power, losing control, IMF losing leverage. Can't threaten gold seizure if gold isn't in their system. Can't use debt as weapon if nations aren't borrowing. Can't impose conditions if countries have alternatives. Losing leverage, losing power, losing control over African nations. Financial system losing control over African wealth. Western financial system, IMF, World Bank, Western banks, all losing control, all losing access, all losing ability to exploit African wealth. Losing control, permanently, irreversibly. African Gold Reserve Protection Initiative operates fully. Secure storage network, coordinated transfers, mutual insurance against seizure, collective sovereignty over collective wealth. Operates fully, not planning, not organizing, operating, functional, active, effective, protection initiative working, transferring gold, protecting wealth, coordinating response, operating at full capacity, secure storage network, multiple facilities, multiple countries, multiple options, Chinese vaults, Russian facilities, Indian storage, diversified, resilient, secure, network, providing alternatives, providing options, providing security, coordinated transfers, not chaotic, not rushed, not disorganized, coordinated, planned, systematic, protection initiative managing transfers, negotiating terms, arranging transport, ensuring security, coordinated operations proving institutional capability, mutual insurance against seizure. If one nation faces seizure attempt, all nations respond. If one reserve gets threatened, all reserves get protected. If one transfer gets blocked, all nations retaliate. Mutual insurance, collective protection, united defense, collective sovereignty over collective wealth, African wealth controlled by Africans, African gold protected by African decisions, African reserves secured by African sovereignty, collective, continental, united. Sovereignty over wealth, proving sovereignty over destiny. IMF tries adapting, offers better loan terms, promises not to seize collateral, attempts to rebuild trust. IMF tries, desperate attempts, panicked responses, reactive measures, trying to stop exodus, trying to restore trust, trying to maintain power, trying and failing. Offers better loan terms, lower interest rates, longer repayment periods, fewer conditions, better terms than before, better terms than they ever offered. Better terms proving previous terms were exploitative, offers coming too late, after trust destroyed, after scheme exposed. Promises not to seize collateral, verbal promises, diplomatic assurances, official statements, promises that mean nothing because leaked documents prove they planned seizure, because actions speak louder than words, because trust can't be rebuilt with promises after attempting theft. Attempts to rebuild trust, sending delegations, offering negotiations, making concessions, attempting to rebuild what they destroyed, attempting to restore what they shattered, attempting to repair what they broke, attempting and failing, because trust requires honesty, requires respect, requires not planning to steal African wealth. But trust is gone, destroyed when they tried to steal Burkina Faso's gold, shattered when leaked documents proved systematic planning, irreparable after African nations discovered the trap. Trust is gone, not damaged, not weakened, gone, completely, permanently, irreversibly, destroyed by their actions, shattered by their planning, eliminated by their exposure, gone. Destroyed when they tried to steal Burkina Faso's gold. That was the breaking point, that was the revelation, that was the proof. Tried to steal $3.2 billion. Tried to confiscate our reserves. Tried to rob us using legal mechanisms. That destroyed trust. Permanently. Shattered when leaked documents proved systematic planning. Documents showing it wasn't isolated incident. Showing it was systematic conspiracy. Showing they planned to seize gold from multiple nations. Documents shattering any remaining trust. Any remaining benefit of doubt. Any remaining credibility. Irreparable after African nations discovered the trap. After seeing the target lists. After reading the seizure timelines. After understanding the coordinated operations. After discovering they were all targeted. All vulnerable. All scheduled for theft. Discovery making trust impossible. Making cooperation impossible. Making relationship impossible. Western financial institutions panic. Losing custody of African gold means losing leverage over African economies. Losing ability to seize reserves means losing threat that kept nations compliant. Losing control over African wealth means losing power over African decisions. Panic. Real panic. Institutional panic. Systemic panic. Western banks panicking. IMF panicking. World Bank panicking. US Treasury panicking. All panicking because power is crumbling. Because control is disappearing. Because dominance is ending. Losing custody of African gold means losing leverage. Custody was power. Custody was control. Custody was leverage. Gold in their banks gave them power over African nations. Gold in their custody gave them leverage over African decisions. Losing custody means losing that power, that control, that leverage. Losing ability to seize reserves means losing threat. Seizure threat was ultimate weapon, ultimate leverage, ultimate control mechanism. Comply or we seize your gold. Accept our conditions or we confiscate your wealth. Losing ability to seize means losing that threat, that weapon, that control. Losing control over African wealth means losing power over African decisions. Control over wealth enabled control over policy. Control over reserves enabled control over governments. Control over gold enabled control over nations. Losing control over wealth means losing control over Africa. Losing power over our decisions. Losing dominance over our future. Swiss banks issue statement. We guarantee security of all deposited gold. We would never participate in unauthorized seizures. Swiss banks respond. Damage control. Public relations. Desperate reassurance. Trying to stop exodus. Trying to restore confidence. Trying to maintain deposits. Issuing guarantees. Making promises. Claiming innocence. We guarantee security. Promise safety. Assure protection. Claim deposits are safe. Claim reserves are secure. Claim gold won't be seized. Guarantees that ring hollow. Promises that sound empty. Claims that nobody believes. We would never participate in unauthorized seizures. Never. Strong word. Absolute denial. Complete rejection. Would never participate. Would never cooperate. Would never facilitate. Never. Except leaked documents prove they were coordinating with IMF. Prove they were preparing to freeze accounts. Prove they were planning to participate. Never means nothing when documents prove otherwise. But the leaked documents prove they were coordinating with IMF. Prove they were preparing to freeze accounts. Prove they were complicit in planned theft. Documents don't lie. Documents show truth. Documents prove coordination. Swiss banks and IMF planning together, coordinating seizure operations, preparing to freeze Burkina Faso accounts, preparing to confiscate African gold. Documents proving their statement is lie. Their guarantee is worthless. Their promise is meaningless. Nobody believes their guarantees anymore. Nobody trusts their security promises. Nobody keeps gold in their vaults. Nobody believes. African nations don't believe. African central banks don't believe. African finance ministers don't believe. Nobody believes because documents prove they lie. Because actions contradicted words. Because planning contradicted promises. Nobody trusts. Trust destroyed. Credibility gone. Reputation shattered. Nobody trusts Swiss banks anymore. Nobody trusts Western banks anymore. Nobody trusts Western financial system anymore. Trust destroyed by their own planning, by their own documents, by their own actions. Nobody keeps gold in their vaults. Exodus continues. Transfers accelerate. Reserves flee. Nobody keeping gold where it can be seized, where it can be frozen, where it can be confiscated. Nobody keeping gold in Western banks. Everyone moving to alternatives. Everyone protecting wealth. Everyone choosing sovereignty. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. IMF tried to seize our gold reserves. I moved them first. I protected our wealth. I exposed their scheme. I triggered continental awakening. I am Ibrahim Traoré. Identity, authority, responsibility. President who saw the trap. President who acted decisively. President who protected national wealth. President who exposed institutional theft. President who triggered continental revolution. IMF tried to seize our gold reserves. They planned it. They coordinated it. They prepared it. They tried. And I stopped them by moving gold first, by transferring reserves before they could act, by protecting wealth before they could confiscate. I stopped them. I moved them first. Preemptive action, decisive protection, strategic transfer. Moved 847 metric tons before they could seize it. Moved $3.2 billion before they could confiscate it. Moved our wealth before they could steal it. Moved first, acted decisively, protected completely. I protected our wealth. That's my responsibility. That's my duty. That's my obligation. Protected from IMF. Protected from seizure. Protected from confiscation. Protected by moving to China. Protected by transferring to non-Western custody. Protected by acting before they could. Protected our wealth. Secured our future. Defended our sovereignty. I exposed their scheme. Released documents. Published planning papers. Showed target lists. Revealed seizure timelines. Exposed coordination. Made public what they wanted hidden. Made visible what they wanted secret. Made known what they wanted concealed. Exposed their scheme. Revealed their conspiracy. Proved their exploitation. I triggered continental awakening. Not intentionally. Not deliberately. Not as plan. But as consequence. As result. As outcome. My exposure triggered awakening. My action inspired others. My protection encouraged continent. Triggered awakening, inspired action, catalyzed revolution. I'm not the president who waits for theft to happen, who hopes Western institutions will respect our property, who trusts IMF's humanitarian rhetoric while they plan confiscation. Not the president who waits, who accepts, who complies, who trusts. Not that president, not that leader, not that kind of African president who Western powers expect, who they're used to, who they can exploit. Not that president. Who waits for theft, who reacts after seizure, who responds after confiscation, who acts after robbery, not waiting, not reacting, not responding after, acting before, protecting preemptively, defending proactively, who hopes Western institutions will respect our property, Hope isn't strategy. Hope isn't protection. Hope isn't sovereignty. Not hoping they'll respect us. Not trusting they'll treat us fairly. Not assuming they'll act honorably. Acting to protect ourselves regardless of their intentions. Who trusts IMF's humanitarian rhetoric while they plan confiscation? Not trusting rhetoric while ignoring actions. Not believing promises while seeing planning. Not accepting words while reading documents. Not trusting. Investigating. Verifying. Protecting. I'm the president who saw the trap, who moved faster than they expected, who protected our gold before they could take it, who exposed their documents before they could deny it, who saw the trap, who read documents carefully, who understood financial mechanisms, who recognized exploitation patterns, who saw what they were planning, who understood their scheme, who recognized the danger, saw the trap, understood the threat, acted accordingly, who moved faster, who acted decisively, who executed efficiently, who transferred completely, who moved 847 metric tons in 3 months, who coordinated with China covertly, who completed operation before IMF could react, moved faster, acted quicker, succeeded completely, who protected our gold before they could take it, preemptive protection, proactive defense, strategic action, protected before seizure, transferred before confiscation, secured before theft, protected our gold, saved our wealth, defended our sovereignty, who exposed their documents before they could deny it, made public before they could spin, released evidence before they could explain, published proof before they could dismiss, exposed documents, revealed planning, proved conspiracy, before they could deny, before they could cover up, before they could lie. The gold they thought they'd seize, safe in Beijing. The reserves they thought they controlled, beyond their jurisdiction. The wealth they thought they'd confiscate, protected by Chinese sovereignty. The gold they planned to take, the reserves they targeted, the wealth they wanted, all safe, all protected, all beyond their reach, in Beijing, in Chinese central bank vaults, under Chinese sovereignty, protected by Chinese law, secured by Chinese commitment, safe, beyond their jurisdiction, beyond IMF authority, beyond Western legal system, beyond Swiss bank cooperation, beyond their ability to seize, beyond their power to confiscate, beyond their capacity to steal, beyond jurisdiction, beyond control, beyond reach. Protected by Chinese sovereignty, that's the shield, that's the protection, that's the security. Chinese sovereignty protecting African wealth, Chinese law defending Burkina Faso reserves, Chinese commitment securing our gold, protected, safe, ours. This is just the beginning, not the end, not the peak. The beginning of African nations protecting their wealth, moving reserves beyond Western control, building alternative financial systems, securing economic sovereignty. Beginning, not conclusion, not culmination. Beginning, start of transformation, start of revolution, start of liberation, beginning of African nations taking control. Beginning of continental financial independence, beginning of economic sovereignty, of African nations protecting their wealth, not just Burkina Faso, not just Mali and Niger, African nations, plural, continental, 23 nations moved or moving gold. More nations planning transfers, more nations reviewing storage, continental movement, systematic protection, united action, moving reserves beyond Western control, from Swiss banks to Chinese vaults, from London storage to Russian facilities, from New York custody to Indian security, moving systematically, moving deliberately, moving permanently, beyond Western control, beyond IMF reach, beyond seizure capability, building alternative financial systems, not reforming existing system, not improving Western institutions, building alternatives, Chinese storage facilities, Russian custody services, Indian gold vaults, alternative systems, non-Western options, sovereign choices, securing economic sovereignty. That's the objective, that's the goal, that's the achievement. Economic sovereignty through wealth protection, economic sovereignty through reserve control, economic sovereignty through financial independence, securing sovereignty, claiming independence, achieving freedom. The beginning of IMF losing leverage, losing custody, losing power, losing ability to threaten African nations with gold seizure. IMF losing leverage. Can't threaten seizure if gold isn't accessible. Can't impose conditions if nations have alternatives. Can't control decisions if wealth is protected. Losing leverage. losing power, losing control, losing custody. African gold leaving Western banks, African reserves fleeing Western control, African wealth moving beyond Western reach. IMF losing custody, Western banks losing deposits, Western system losing African wealth, losing power, power based on control, power based on leverage, power based on threat, all disappearing, all evaporating, all gone, losing power over African nations, losing power over African decisions, losing power over African future,